I'd like to welcome everyone to our first public information session for the city's urban growth strategy. We are really looking forward to the conversation this afternoon. A couple of things before I introduce people that are on the call, just to get it started. So we are recording. It will be posted to the project webpage. We have enabled interpretation services for today's meeting. So I encourage everyone to click on the language of your choice. So you'll see an interpretation icon in the toolbar of your meeting, of the platform, and you can click on that and choose whichever language you'd prefer to listen to. My name's Donna Hind. I'm a partner at the Planning Partnership, and I'm helping the team with everything related to engagement and consultation. Also on the call from the team, the project manager is Eric from Watson. I'm going to get Eric just to, wave your hand. Thanks, Eric. And on the call, I'm going to turn it over to Bill in just a second, but I'll introduce the people from the city who are joining the conversation and listening very intently for the rest of the day. So we have Bill Budd from the city. He's the Director of Planning and Development. I'll just get Bill to wave your hand for a minute. And then Andrew Smith, who's Long Range Policy Planner and Project Manager from the city, and also Josh Davies, who's their Urban Planner and a Project Coordinator. So we're working very closely with the city staff team, and it's been a terrific project so far. I'd like to ask Bill just to say a few words of welcome.
Sure. Thank you, Donna. On behalf of the City of Moncton, I'd like to thank everyone for participating in this important community engagement program. Your participation is very key to this very important city building initiative. Not only will your feedback be used to help inform the direction of our urban growth strategy, but it'll also contribute to laying the groundwork for our next municipal plan review. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks a lot, Bill. So the way we've got the next couple of hours organized, we're going to start with a presentation, and Eric and I will walk you through the work that the team has done so far. We want to make sure we leave as much of the meeting time available for conversation. We have most of the conversation at the end. And before we end the meeting, I again want to make sure that everybody has had a chance to share whatever thoughts and ideas you want to share with us. We'll be using, in order to share thoughts, you can use one of the icons where you can, the icon to raise your hand. You can physically wave at me with your camera on, or you can send me a note in the chat box, and I will keep an eye out for that and ask you to turn your mic on and ask your question. Whatever goes in the chat box becomes the record of the meeting, so be a tad careful what goes in there, because it will be, like I said, part of the record. So I'll get us started with the first few slides. So today we're going to be introducing the urban growth strategy. We'll set the context of the work by highlighting some of the city's growth trends and the foundation laid by the city's municipal plan that Bill mentioned in the beginning. We'll describe the city's urban structure, and then most important, we have a chunk of time left to make sure we have a great conversation on this. The city is experiencing a lot of growth. It's now the largest and fastest growing municipality in the whole province. The growth strategy will provide clear direction on where and how the city plans for more places to live and work over the next 25 years. Growth can occur in a number of ways, and we're really looking forward to hearing your thoughts on where and how it should occur. So it can occur by intensifying development in your downtown. You can build new neighborhoods in currently undeveloped areas. You can infill existing neighborhoods, and you can intensify development by adding more development in existing centers and corridors in the city. The purpose of the strategy is to determine where and how residential employment growth can happen over the next 25 years. Watson are doing a lot of work to forecast growth in development, to assess citywide and local growth scenarios, in part by understanding the cost of various scenarios. So we're not reporting out today on what those options are, what those scenarios are. This is the first of a series of sessions we're going to be having over the life of the urban growth strategy. So the team is working to understand the short-term and the long-term benefits and liabilities of various growth scenarios. As Bill mentioned at the set off, this will form the foundation of the review of the municipal plan, which is anticipated for 2022. And then through the work that the team is doing on the urban growth strategy, the city will be updating and aligning it with other key strategic documents of the city. So I think it's important to understand where the urban growth strategy sits and fits within the context of all the other plans and strategies and studies that the city has done and is doing. So here's the municipal plan that Bill mentioned from the outset. So it is the overarching umbrella under which everything else sits. Here's our urban growth strategy. So it, again, as Bill mentioned, is going to inform the update of the municipal plan. Embedded in the municipal plan, as I'm sure many of you know, are several secondary plans that include more detailed direction for the downtown and for a few of the neighborhoods, Division Land, Sunny Brae, Humphreys Brook. There's also a strategic plan. And under this upper level of all the strategic plans, statutory plans and strategies are a number of non-statutory plans and strategies, which include many specialized studies in transportation, recreation, corporate studies, environmental, economic and tourism strategies and studies. So it's a great framework, and it's important to understand exactly where it fits within the context of other specialized studies and plans. So why it matters to you, why you've given up a couple of hours to participate in the call this afternoon. It'll help shape the future form of the city. It'll address the need for more residential and employment lands within the city. And it affects the long-term environmental and financial sustainability of the city. I spent several weeks at the beginning of the project talking to councillors, and the city team reached out to various communities, stakeholder groups. And so what we learned, and we also received a lot of input online, the city set up a terrific web page specific to this exercise. And so when I squinted my eyes and looked at all the input that we've received so far, I see input that relates to specific geographies of growth across the whole city. A lot of people talked about the importance of complete communities. So those are communities where you can age in place, where you can have your first apartment and you can retire in the same community. People talked about strong towns. They talked about looking at planning through a gender lens, through a multicultural lens. Almost everybody I speak to talks about the importance of affordable housing and housing for all. People talked about regional planning. So putting whatever we're doing in Moncton within the context of a bigger area. About downtown being the focus for intensification, having more green space, having more amenities, sustainability, protecting natural heritage, and then things related to mobility. People would say, I want to be able to use my bike more. I don't want to have to drive everywhere. I want to make sure that there's universal design so that everything's accessible for everyone of all abilities. So we're going to move into a piece where we'll set the context for what we're doing. And I'm going to ask Eric to turn his mic on and to take us through the next couple of slides.
Great. Thank you, Donna. Welcome, everyone. I'm Eric Carvinen with Watson and Associates. Here to provide you with a bit of an overview on the regional and local context to today's discussion. To provide context to this initial phase of work, we have prepared a community profile and growth trends analysis, which ultimately will help inform our technical analysis when we start looking at the growth outlook, growth potential for the city over the next 25 years. It's important to really understand, the existing conditions in the city, as well as recent trends with respect to growth and development, to really understand how we're going to move forward with respect to planning for future development and growth. So the City of Moncton is clearly not an island. It's part of a much broader, larger, greater Moncton area located in southeast New Brunswick. It's part of a CMA, a census metropolitan area, which is now the fastest growing in Atlantic Canada. Over the past decade, the population of the CMA has increased by 13%. So this is definitely significant and important to understand within the local context. The CMA, the Greater Moncton area, is comprised of a range of communities, which includes the City of Moncton, as well as a number of towns, villages, and parishes. And together they do work as a metropolitan area. So understanding the City of Moncton within that broader regional context, it's important to note that the city is the largest municipality within the Greater Moncton area, accounting for about half of the population base of about 80,000. The Greater Moncton area has a population of about 160,000, and the city is also home to a large share of the region's employment base, accounting for about 2/3 of the total. The City of Moncton, similar to the CMA or the Greater Moncton area as a whole, has seen significant population growth over the past 15 years. The city has grown by about 20% over that time period, having seen an increase from about 66,000 people in 2006 to an estimated 80,000 in 2021. This is in contrast to the New Brunswick population as a whole, which provincially has seen relatively modest population growth in comparison over the same time period. The City of Moncton's population base is also younger than the provincial average. Average age in 2016, based on census data, is about 41 years of age versus the provincial average of about 46. Having said that, the population of the city is aging. This is typical of most communities across Canada, and those trends that we're observing in other municipalities as well. Currently, about 36% of the city's population are 55 years or older, and that percentage is expected to increase over the coming decades. Moncton's housing base is quite diverse. It's comprised of about 34,400 occupied housing units. This has increased by about 24% since 2006. The city has seen a fairly robust residential development activity over that 15-year period, averaging about 440 new housing units constructed annually over that period. The city's housing base does represent or is comprised of a range of housing typologies, with about 53% being low density typology, which is comprised of single and semi-detached units. About 10% are medium density, which would be towns and row houses, while about 1/3 are high density units comprised of condominiums and apartments of varying density types. The tenure of housing in the city is also quite diverse, with about 60% being owner occupied, with the other 40% being renter occupied. And this really does illustrate the diverse needs of housing demand in the city currently. With respect to Moncton's employment base, as I mentioned earlier, Moncton does have a significant employment base, represented by about 54,400 jobs in 2021, This represents an increase of about 7% since 2006. Over that time period, there's been significant non-residential development activity to help support this employment growth. We, of course, have been going through a fairly serious pandemic, which has ultimately resulted in economic and employment contractions. And so recognizing this, there has obviously been periods of growth as well as contraction in the city's employment base. The employment base spans a broad range of commercial, industrial, institutional sectors. It's heavily oriented towards healthcare and social services, retail, trade, finance and insurance, accommodation and food, as well as educational sectors. Over the past 10 years, the city has experienced a gradual shift to a greater share of service-based sectors as part of the overall employment base. As I mentioned earlier, the non-residential development sector has been fairly healthy over the past decade, especially since 2013. Over that time period, the city has averaged about $24 million annually in non-residential development activity across a range of industrial, commercial, and institutional sectors. A large share of this development activity has been accommodated within Moncton's employment areas. Next slide. And I turn this now back to Donna.
Thanks, Eric. Yep, thanks a lot. Just a couple of things on the framework that's provided by the current municipal plan. And I've looked at that document, and it's the foundation of that plan are these 9 principles. And when I had a chance to go through them, I was reflecting on a lot of the things that I heard through the conversations that I had with the people at the beginning of the study. And so some of those principles about the city embracing nature, about centered on people, accessible to all, inclusive of diversity, creating beautiful and vibrant spaces, celebrating history, making the city walkable and bikeable. So when the city did that for the earlier municipal plan, there was consensus for those principles, the vision, the priorities. So this, to me, was a great foundation for all the work that the team is doing on the urban growth strategy. And then in that municipal plan, there's a chapter on how the city guides land use, growth, and change, and it's called Shaping and Sustaining Our City. So citywide, big picture, and within that chapter, there are the 10 strategies that form the foundation of shaping and sustaining the city in the municipal plan. And so again, when I looked at those strategies, I saw all the things that people talked to me about being so important, about growing within an urban boundary, about creating and preserving a citywide system of parks, about making the link between land use and transportation. So again, I was really happy to see such a great foundation for some of the work that we're doing in the urban growth strategy. We're going to move now into a little bit on the city's urban structure. And this is important because we do want to talk a little bit about the geographies of where people on the call think there are possibilities for growth and where people think it is most important. So I'm going to turn it back over to Eric to get us started with understanding the boundaries and understanding the difference between the municipal boundary and the urban boundary.
Thank you, Donna. So definitely this is an important conversation to understand the city, its urban structure, and within the context of future growth and development, and where ultimately future growth can be accommodated. So the city, in terms of its corporate boundaries, are identified here in the black border. And this is the municipal boundary, which totals about 14,000 hectares of land, or about 35,000 acres. Of this total, about 55% is located within the urban boundary. And that urban boundary is home to the vast majority of the city's population, housing, and employment base. So recognizing that the residual, the 45%, is largely rural in nature, but equally important within the broader city context. What's important to understand is when in completing an urban growth strategy of this nature, the focus really is understanding the urban area and how it's intended to accommodate the majority of future growth and development moving forward, which again is highlighted in the red outline and within the yellow polygon on the map. The urban boundary does have a specific definition, which we provided here. It's defined as the boundary between the areas which are designated for eventual urban development and areas intended to remain in rural uses over the longer term. And so clearly that distinction is important when undertaking a long-term growth study of this nature. And ultimately the urban boundary and the lands within it are important because for us to be able to move forward, it's essential that the city make use of the existing urban area and the resources and infrastructure within those locations to accommodate future growth within that urban context, and to try our very best to maintain the rural character of lands that fall outside of that urban boundary. So this map here provides for more detail on the urban structure. Again, the lands that are within that red line that was on the previous map. So recognizing that the urban structure within the city is quite dynamic and complex, there's a range of geographic areas that are identified here. This includes the downtown, which is highlighted in red, which is your the urban core of the city, and also a focal point for employment, cultural and entertainment amenities in the city, as well as other neighborhoods, which are highlighted in the yellow, in the light orange yellow color, which basically represent the more established neighborhoods within the city that are considered stable. And then we also have in the orange polygons a range of mixed-use centers and corridors, which ultimately can accommodate greater economic and housing and population development and activity, not only today but into the future. And these are largely focused in intensification areas and corridors along major arterial roadways within the city. It's also important to understand that this study is going to consider not only opportunities for future population and housing growth and development, but also for employment. And much of that employment growth is intended to be focused in your industrial and employment lands, are also known as employment areas. And those here are identified here in the purple. And these are essentially those employment areas that are designated in the city. This includes two concentrations, one in the northeast, focused in and around the area of Caledon and the Moncton East, Caledonia and the Moncton East Business Park, as well as in the southwest part of the city, located in the Moncton West Industrial Park area. So this map here provides a little bit more information related to opportunities to accommodate future growth and development, not only in new greenfield locations, but as well as infill areas. The infill areas are identified here in brown, and these are sort of key locations that are identified as intensification areas, essentially that offer longer term opportunities to accommodate a range of population, housing related growth, as well as employment functions. The key ones identified here on the map include Wheeler Boulevard, Carson Drive, Vaughan Harvey Boulevard, as well as Ivan Rand Drive. And these are going to be looked at in more detail in the study with respect to the opportunities and challenges in accommodating growth in these locations over the next 25 years. The city also has a number of greenfield growth areas. Essentially, these are currently vacant, largely vacant lands located within the urban boundary that can accommodate a range of growth and development. And these are also identified in the map here in the green polygons. Key areas include the North End, the Vision Lands, Royal Oaks, as well as the East End.
Okay, thanks, Eric. So that actually concludes the presentation part of it. And now we're going to get into the conversation. But before we do, I wanted to try, I'm not going to try, I'm going to launch. I'm interested to know the people that are on the call, and I'm sure everybody else is interested to know what ward you live in. Now, I have a ward map. If I'm going to just pull it up while people are answering the poll. I just want to take a couple of seconds to answer this question. So on the screen, you're going to be seeing the ward map that is unscrolling. And I've had 7 people answer. So I'm just going to give it just a tiny second. You can have a look at the map and get yourself oriented to the wards 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. And just maybe I can get a couple more people answering. So word 1, word 2, word 3, word 4. Okay, I'm going to just end the poll now. And are you seeing, is everyone seeing the results that the most participants are from Ward 2 on the call? So just always interested to see where everyone is living. I'm going to stop that and load up my workshop again, the presentation. And it's just loading up. Eric, can you see my screen again?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. And the polling survey is down. It's the results of the poll is down, or is it still on the screen?
No, it's down.
Okay, perfect. All right, so first question. So looking at the map, so let me just go back to this one. So as we mentioned, growth can be accommodated in a number of locations, undeveloped greenfield sites, or locations that have already been developed. So what we're interested in, and I'm happy to have people put the question in the chat box or just turn their mic on. There's only like 20 people on the call, so happy to have you kind of just get queued up and turn your mics on. So looking at this map, love to get people's reflections on where growth is most appropriate, what the right balance might be between downtown and some of the other areas, the greenfield growth areas, which are green, versus the infill areas. Anybody want to take a crack and share some ideas? Go ahead, Eric. Yep, go ahead.
First, Eric from Watson, I want to say I appreciate you spelling your name with a K. I think that's very solid.
Yes.
We're going to start there.
Right on.
I guess the question for me is about it's, and maybe this is going to come up later, but it's not so much where, but how. I think how the growth is done will dictate kind of where the growth should go. If you really want, in my opinion, want to curb urban sprawl, well then, you know, you wouldn't want to do it in 3 or the outskirts of 4 or the top of 1 or something like that. If you are looking at urban density, then I think we do have to look at the areas where we're a little closer to town, where the services currently are, and take a much broader scope. And this is, like I said, I'm getting perhaps into the weeds now, but if we want to look at changing the way our city functions moving forward into the future, and quite frankly, that's a concern of mine. And one of the worst things and best things I've done is watched a whole bunch of TED Talks on urban planning, because it's exciting what could be done. But be able to change the mindset to say, you know, moving forward, we just can't live the way we're living right now in a sustainable way. And even last night at City Council, the presentation that was given about a health study that's being done was done in Moncton about the effects of climate change on health. So there's so many parameters around what should we be doing? And should we decide to say we're not so concerned about it in the short term, then yeah, I mean, you know, you can look at areas 2, 3, and 4. But for me, I think we need to look at more how are we going to develop in the future, not so much as where. I think the where comes after the first part.
So for you, for the how, you're talking about the built form, you know, the height of the building, the form of the building. If it's a particular type of building, make a decision on that and then determine where that goes. Is that what you're saying, Eric?
Yes, because
Yeah, okay.
if you want to limit the size of your footprint and
Yeah.
perhaps, you know, green the roof, have it such that you don't need to have, you're moving away from a car-centric
Right.
community, then what are the services that need to go along to make that feasible for people? And like I said, there's a lot of connections, a lot of dots that have to be kind of, you know, filled in.
Okay. Okay. Terrific. Anybody on the call that has a reaction to what Eric has put on the table, or Eric, the other Eric, do you want to respond? Have any thoughts about what Eric just
Yeah,
mentioned?
it's a very obviously a relevant topic. Much of what was raised, and certainly something that we're keenly aware of in a study of this nature. You mentioned sort of the how. Part of what we need to understand is the sort of the magnitude of growth that we're expecting over the next 25 years and what that's going to look like.
Yeah.
And that in itself is very important because it'll help identify sort of the opportunities or challenges to greater intensification and more smart growth within that local context. And so, it's looking at more than just how much population and employment we're expecting to see in terms of growth, but what type of age groups are going to be accommodated, what type of housing needs will they have, and that's going to also then impact what opportunities there are for different types of housing, especially as we start looking at higher density type housing development, and also for employment and the types of employment that we're expecting and how well that can be accommodated within mixed use locations and intensification areas, and that type of thing. And so there's a lot of moving parts to this, but I certainly do appreciate the feedback.
Okay. Anybody else on the call? Anybody else have ideas about where it should be? We've given you a bunch of things on the list, on the menu. Any preferences of where you would go first? Okay, I'm going to go to the next question and just to see, have a more general conversation, which we're interested to understand what maybe some of the biggest opportunities and the biggest challenges for growth in Moncton might be. So when I could put that map up again and you sit back and you think, the biggest opportunities that growth in Moncton could result in are whatever. And Eric mentioned a few things when he was sharing his ideas on the how before the where. Anybody else have any other thoughts on what growth could result in? That would be a great thing. And then the opposite of that growth makes you nervous because there are challenges with something. Yep, go ahead, Eric.
Sorry, I was pausing to see if anybody else wanted to say something first. I think the opportunities for growth, there are all kinds of opportunities for tourism. I think particularly around the riverfront.
Yeah.
My company a while ago was responsible for doing the festivities around the opening of the gates for the Graham government, and all the research that we had to follow up on. Everything has come to pass. They said was going to come to pass, and so moving forward, I think if everything still comes to pass, there'll be tremendous opportunity for tourism and for public space. I think part of the biggest challenge, the flip side of that is it's going to be. We've been building like crazy, but it just, in my mind, it just kind of seems to be, I don't say haphazard, but someone's got a big building complex they want to put up, boom, great. You know, sign on the dotted line, away you go. I think that there needs to be, well, the challenge I think is to be able to say, okay, we just can't build to build. We need to build with public space in mind, and what can the developer give back to the public for the land that they're using. And other municipalities, from what I understand, are doing that. For every X amount of footprint that a developer takes up, they have to provide X amount of public space, and not just say, point to an area that's across the street that the city owns, says, there's your public space. Say, no, what are you going to provide? And loose comparison is like a carbon tax. You may not be able to be doing it yourself, but you're going to pay for it somewhere else. So maybe they can't accommodate on their particular footprint, but maybe they can buy a lot somewhere else and make sure that's reserved for a public space or to add on. So in terms of challenges, I think the challenge is going to be able to say no to a developer's plan, to say not say no, but let's look at this and see how can everyone benefit.
That's a really terrific point, and I think you summarized it right at the end, right at the end, that you're not necessarily saying no to development, you're saying yes to development, and what does the city get as well. And you're right in saying that many cities work very hard to make sure they get a full suite of public amenities and public space in association with development, so that it's not putting a burden on what the city, town, or village has already. That's a terrific point, and that is a challenge. That's often very difficult to get that. And then you're right about the opportunities, tremendous opportunity for tourism and riverfront development, especially downtown, thriving, healthy downtown. Lots of people go visiting on holidays and vacation to go to those great urban centers that are thriving with lots of things to do, lots of places for people to live. Those are a couple of great points. Any other suggestions about what growth can result in, and what you're really nervous about when you hear about the opportunity for Moncton to grow? Yeah, go ahead, Michael. Yeah, go ahead.
In concert with what Eric is talking about building or ensuring development is maximizing where services are already in place, or bus routes, etc., and how to make them more profitable and more feasible. My concern in all that is the city infrastructure.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the new development I see happening in new areas out on Barry Mills Road off on the West End, for example, is causing the city to build whole new infrastructure. Where's the tie-in with the city trying to maximize its existing infrastructure and having development take fuller advantage of existing city infrastructure? So yes, it's the sewers and it's the water, etc., but it's also parks and other city services.
Yep, community centers, community facilities, that kind of thing as well.
Yeah, because I don't see the plan for that, for parks, community centers growing or being built up around as a focal point. So it's because developers would rather have new land, it's cheaper for them, but it costs more for the city to provide services to as these developments as they sprawl further and further away from the existing services as well as the city infrastructure. So I don't see that relationship going on at all. And I know it's tough when you're just hoping you get developers will actually spend their money here. It's really at a slow pace. It sounds the presentations like it's great growth, but I just moved, in January from Victoria. So the pace of growth out in the West in Vancouver and that is a lot outside of here is so different.
Yeah.
This is where you have an advantage with I see it's pretty respectful planning going on, some good thinking, but it's to make sure that it really ties better into existing service infrastructure so you can maximize it, as well as the city's infrastructure.
Okay, that is a terrific point. And I think, Eric, I'm going to ask you to put your mic on, because that is some of the work that you're going to be doing in assessing the growth scenarios. So maybe, Eric, can you just turn your mic on and just share some of the work that you're going to be doing in the next stage of the exercise, where, to get to Michael's point, understand the cost to the city with respect to infrastructure, water, sewer, but also community facilities, public space.
Right. Yeah, no, so, part of the next, well, there's a number of phases in this study, but certainly once we have, a growth forecast identified for the 25-year period for population, housing, and employment, then we're going to start looking at varying scenarios on how that growth can potentially be accommodated, and recognizing there's a range of planning sort of methods or approaches with respect to, more business as usual, which would largely be focusing on, greenfield development, doing a lot of the heavy lifting to accommodate growth, to more compact approaches, to looking at more, intensification as doing more of the heavy lifting in terms of accommodating future growth, and recognizing that each of those has varying sort of opportunities and challenges. And we're going to be looking at that through a whole range of lenses. One of them is looking at it through, servicing requirements and sort of the fiscal impacts of, accommodating growth in those various scenarios. So recognizing that greenfield development, ultimately does have bring, costs related to servicing to the city. Residential development itself is it tends to not be a net provider on a fiscal basis. So it ultimately costs a municipality more to service a new growth and development in residential locations than the revenues that it would get from, property assessment and tax revenues. So then that's obviously a consideration. And so ultimately, looking at intensification opportunities is fairly attractive from the point of view about utilizing existing, infrastructure, amenities, whether it be, parks and other services. So those are all important. But then there is another side to it as well, which often is overlooked, in that much of the existing infrastructure, if we're looking at water or sewer mains, they were only sized to a certain dimension or capacity. And so when you start looking at intensification, there may be a tipping point in certain locations where once you go above a certain threshold, there would be a certain need for upsizing of that local infrastructure. So again, it's not as clear to say that we can definitely utilize all that existing infrastructure. That may be the case, but it may not be. And so these are all considerations that we will explore further in the study.
Okay, thanks, Eric. And just before I go off this question, I'm going to just go down through my list of participants, and I'll call your name out, and I'll just give you just a minute to turn your mic on if you want, because I know everybody that I've talked to, there've been so many ideas about what does growth result in, and no, I don't want growth. I'm really worried about whatever worries you. So I'm gonna just go down. It's in alphabetical order. I'll call out the names that I haven't heard from. Again, just I want to make sure we give everybody a chance to talk if they'd like to. So on my list, I have Bob. Let's just take a minute. And you don't have to turn your mic on, but I just want to make sure I give you a chance. And then I have Boyd. And then I have Giselle. And then I have Grandpa. I love that name, Grandpa. Let's wait for a second. And then I have JF. There you go, JF. Did you want to share some thoughts? No? Okay. And then I have John D. Kirk. Lena. Thrive, people from Thrive Properties. Tosin. and Busola. Okay, before I go to the next question, I'm going to launch another poll just quickly. I want to understand how long you've lived in Moncton. So if you can let me know whether it's less than 5 years, 6 to 10, or more than 20 years, just again helps us kind of understand who we're talking to in these sections. I'll just give it another couple of minutes. Let you fill in a few more. And then we've got another couple of questions to ask. So I'm going to end that and share the results. And that's really interesting because it's almost 50-50 split between those of you who've been here for more than 20 years and those of you who are relatively recent residents. So that gives a really interesting perspective. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing that. And I'm going to now go to another set of questions, and then we can wrap up. So this set of questions is about, again, understanding the priorities and wondering if within the full spectrum of possibilities of where growth can occur, the Greenfield growth areas, the centers and corridors, the existing neighborhoods, the downtown, is there anything that we should know about priorities, and do those priorities change? So if we're looking at the immediate future within the next 5 years, as opposed to midterm, as opposed to long term, people have any thoughts about if you were going to calibrate the possibilities according to time? And then I'm also happy, while you're thinking about this question, to think about the city within the larger context of the province and what the role is of Moncton within the province. So happy to get anybody's thoughts on that. Priorities for growth. And I think, Eric, you talked about this in your response to the first question. The priority should be closer to where the town services are now.
Sorry.
Yep, go ahead, Eric.
When you say planning for growth, you mean what are the first 5 years? What should we be looking at?
Yeah. If you were to imagine that map that we had up of the city that showed all the possibilities, would you?
I would almost kind of look at it from the opposite way. I would look at it from perhaps 15 years out, and then work backwards to say, you know, if we need to get to this point, how are we going to get there? And then that will fill in from the beginning, because I think that again, it's kind of the cart before the horse. If we know where we're going to go, then we can plan how to get there, and it's a whole lot easier, because then all decisions you make moving forward are based on that end goal. If you're satisfied with that end goal, so you can. I forget her name there. The mayor of Mississauga there, that's like 200 years old. What's her name?
Hazel McCallion.
Yeah. So I don't mean any disrespect. I mean, that's
she is 100. She is 100.
I know. I said, I thought she was 100, but I mean, she knew where she wanted to take the city, and she had the longevity to be there to kind of see it through. But from what I heard is that she knew that this is kind of where the city needed to be long term. And then kind of, working back, and you kind of push those things forward. Now, that's difficult when you have a potential change every 4 years. That's why I think it's more critical for the staff to have the agreement that this is where we need to be, and here's why. And I think that, again, just to talk about, climate change and what could be happening, we have to plan for a lot of what ifs, and then how can we still be viable and functional 15, 20 years out. In order to, if we say, okay, 20 years out, the climate's going to be like this, we're not going to be able to do that. We're not going to have this available to us anymore. We may need to be growing some of our own vegetables. Who knows?
Okay.
Then you work backwards.
Yeah, that is interesting. So you're saying it's not based on a number, that Watson is going to come up with. It's not based on geography necessarily, which is what I was saying. You're saying it's based first on those what ifs. What if climate is like this? What if we have to be growing more of our own food? What if? So those are variables that we haven't talked about, but that's a really, is that what you're saying? Is that the perspective?
Yeah, in
Yeah.
part. It's kind of like I want to say a Swiss Army knife approach, but if we know that we want to be sustainable and the big goal is that this is where we think our population is going to be to accommodate this amount of people, this is what we're going to have. How are we going to do that and be sustainable? And then, like I said, work our way backwards. And geography could play a part. All kinds of things can play a part. I think that this presentation last night, in particular at Council, talking about Health Canada, how the costs are going to affect us, because they say, if you have increased melanoma, oh, here's a simple example. They said, with the freezing and thawing that we're having now, that we're seeing in the winters now, we're seeing an increase of people slipping on the ice and breaking their hips. That's something that seems kind of simple, but you think, well, that is a result. That's a tangible result of climate change, and there's a finite cost put to that. So, if we think, okay, what's going to be costing us in the future in terms of transportation, gas? Do we have to go to electricity? Do we need to go through solar power for everything? There's, as Eric said, there's so many variables that we have to consider. But I think we have to look at the big picture. Where do we need to be in the future? And then, like I said, work our way back.
Okay, that is really interesting. JF, I see you've got your camera on. Does that mean you want to share some thoughts or no? Okay. And boy, did you put your mic on?
Yeah,
it's not muted. There you go.
Just now joining you with audio. I did something on chat, but that didn't work, so I had to use another computer.
Okay.
So now I've got two computers going.
Did you want to share some?
Well, I haven't participated up till now. I thought it was more of a listen type of thing.
Okay. And knowing that we're looking for some thoughts, do you want to share any thoughts on the questions that we put on the screen?
Actually, the thing on chat I asked everybody where everybody lived. I said,
I know, yeah. How many don't live in Moncton? That's a very good thing. It makes me
how
think
many
I'm going to
don't live in
change that.
Moncton at all?
I'm going to change that for tonight's meeting. That's very a good point.
Frankly, I appreciate someone who's wants to listen in for their interest, but they have no skin in the game. So
No, fair enough. Fair enough. It's important for us to know.
And I missed the other one. The other little tool I was trying to had to get a hold of the Lion. The Lion, I guess, is having some difficulty to change my password on me. Anyway, and I have lived here for 20 years or more.
Okay.
Eric Jingles knows me as well. I used to be a city councilor for 12 years, and I was on the planning commission for, I think, 14 or 15, including the last two as chair.
Okay.
I was the last, felt like the captain of the Titanic. I was the last chair of the old planning commission. Bill Budd would know all about that. Anyway, you had a nice, interesting map there, and I wish I could see it again.
Yep, let me put it back. Let me click back to it. This one?
Yeah, I guess that would be it. The area number 3 is always one that has bothered me immensely, because I was on council when he started the Royal Oaks development, and I had told the developer at the time, I said, why don't you just build 100 homes on septic systems, build them a nice big lot so that you can have infill in 30 or 40 years or 50 years when the city catches up to you. And he thought I was crazy. And but unfortunately at the time, the Pine Tree Mini Home Park had difficulty with water and sewer. And I guess maybe I was very persuasive, but I managed, even though it wasn't my ward, I managed to talk the city into putting a trunk sewer line in there so that we would have a really high quality mobile home park within our city boundaries, because at the time they were moving outside the boundaries. Anyway, long story short, that area number 3 is probably my fault. And it's really kind of shouldn't be there. There's a whole land between that area number 3 and area number 2. The area number 2 should have been developed long before area number 3 was. Are you still with me?
Yeah, I'm here. Yep, I hear you. Yep,
Can you hear
area
me
number
okay?
2. Yep, perfect.
Yeah, and we call that the vision lands, I guess, and is now starting to. But one of the problems was, of course, is that because we developed north of the Trans-Canada Highway, the downstream sewer capacity was very limited, so you couldn't develop it. So if I'm looking at this map, I mean, you've got area 1, 2, and 4 that essentially are undeveloped. There's also a fair number of area that you don't even identify. It's on the Salisbury Road.
Okay,
You know where that is? It'd be like
I do not.
area number 1, and I'm not very good with color.
One. So area
It's
number
actually
1.
colored in white right now.
Okay, here,
Like
is it
there's some sewer
outside? Is it on
issues.
is it on the left side of the red line?
No, right down at the bottom.
Okay, down here?
Yeah, right down at the bottom. Right, see the area around the Petticodiac?
Maybe I'll get
Anyway,
Andrew
it doesn't
Smith
matter.
to-
It's there. You probably have some trunk sewer issues and so on.
Okay,
But,
It's highlighted in pink at the bottom there.
oh, down
pink, is that
here.
it?
Okay,
I told you I
okay.
can't tell colors very well. but
Okay,
I'll
there we
take care of
go.
it.
Okay,
So there, that's another potential area. Now I realize there's a brook there. It's called Michael's Creek. There's also the
okay,
hump yard in that area, so there could be potential pollution. But the thing is, there's an awful lot of vacant land out there, and I don't know how well it's serviced these days. But all these areas, like number 1, number 2, and number 4, there's vacant land everywhere.
yeah,
It's not really being properly utilized, as far as I can figure out.
okay. Okay, well, thank you for that. And that they are 1, 2, 4, they are identified as greenfield growth areas and
Yeah.
probably.
And number 3
precisely
is
for
sort of
that.
unfortunately is there now, so we have to deal with it, but it shouldn't have been there.
Okay, okay,
But it's there now, but I wouldn't encourage a whole lot of development. Every time I drive down Elmwood Drive from, say, Royal Oaks, I think to myself, why in the world would we allow this?
okay, okay.
Just a
Fair
mess.
enough. Fair enough. Okay, thanks, Boyd. I do have a question in the chat box, and I'm wondering if Thrive wants to, are they still on the call? Maybe they're, oh yeah, you are. If you want to put your mic on and ask it, or.
Hi, Donna. It's
there you go.
Caitlin. Can you guys hear us?
Yes, perfect. Yep.
Perfect. So Caitlin LaSalle with Thrive Properties and John McManaman with Thrive Properties as well. It was just a comment sort of back to your earlier questions and some comments around Greenfield development.
Yep.
And we just wanted to sort of highlight that although there are a few different Greenfield areas identified on the map, that they do have different contexts. And Boyd had also just kind of spoken to that. You know, although 2 is identified as a greenfield, it does fit a little bit more as an infill based on where it is in the city and the context that has developed around it.
Okay.
So yes, there is, you know, no servicing there now, but it is close to amenities, it's close to services. It is sort of poised to be more of an infill development as compared to, for example, number 3, which again, Boyd pointed out is
Okay.
much further away from everything else. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to kind of highlight that, yes, although they are flagged as all greenfield, they do have very different contexts, and I think are therefore should be viewed a little bit differently in terms of which ones are more suited for growth.
Okay. And then your other point, which I think is a really good point for everybody on the call, you can clarify, Caitlin, about the plan.
Sure, yeah, just in terms of one of the earlier comments about, you know, all developments should provide some sort of public benefit. The Community Planning Act does already require land for public purposes or cash in lieu when any land is subdivided. So especially in your greenfield areas, that's going to apply regardless. And just to comment on, you know, as development occurs, as intensification occurs, that increases the property taxes for the municipality beyond what that vacant land is doing, and that those revenues can then be used by the municipality to fund things like the recreational opportunities that we talked about earlier, services, and all of that stuff.
And
Okay.
I'd just like to add too that normally with development, the developers are asked to pay for the infrastructure, the majority of the infrastructure. I do realize the city maintains it after the fact, but I'm not sure if the public understands that developers are the ones that pay for most of the infrastructure that goes in. For example, our company just paid the majority of the infrastructure to extend Twin Oaks Road from the new Moncton North YMCA to Ryan Road. And we were the first case that worked with Watson and Associates on that in the city. And I think a lot more people will benefit from that infrastructure than just our development company. So I think it's important for the public to understand that developers do pay a lot for infrastructure and taxes.
Okay, those are really important points of clarification. So thank you for that. So everybody, especially relates back to the question that we had earlier about the worry that development does not bring along with it community facilities and green space and trails, etc. And so I think we've just heard from Thrive that is embedded in the development process, that they are required to provide that or to provide money so that the city can allocate the money elsewhere to other public facilities and places. Eric, do you want to just remind everybody again about the next stage when you're evaluating different growth scenarios and you are considering the impact on infrastructure? And I just want to make sure everybody's clear on what you're doing next, because I hear a lot of interest and concern about that.
Just make a general comment here right now.
Sure, Boyd.
Sure.
And then I'm going to go back to Eric. So Eric, I want you to.
Minister Daniel Lane, as the Minister of Municipal Affairs, is looking at the future of municipalities in New Brunswick, and I believe we're pretty close to something. It's quite possible, for example, that we will soon be one big community, maybe. And I'm just wondering if we're kind of wasting time until he makes his decision on what he's going to do. Because if we're one large community, then all of a sudden the developable area of Greater Moncton, the new city of Kodiak, as I prefer to call it, is a whole different thing.
Interesting. Eric, do you want to respond to that? If there's other kind of provincial direction that makes the work that we're doing for the urban growth strategy obsolete? Do you want to weigh in on that?
I don't know about obsolete. There's obviously, provincial framework, to land use planning, which perhaps Donna has some thoughts to. I think from a growth perspective, there are not any, control totals or any sort of targets that we are required to hit. Those that may be familiar with planning, especially regional planning in other parts of the country, whether it be the Greater Toronto area or out in Vancouver, know that there's more of a growth plan requirement to hit certain population and employment targets under which studies of this nature may have to be completed under in those jurisdictions, whereas here we're not in constrained by those sorts of metrics. And so it's much more of, we need to have a really honest sort of a review of the growth opportunities and challenges within a local context, understand what that looks like, within a, broader regional and provincial context. And also as far as how future growth is accommodated, there are not any prescribed density targets or requirements with respect to the share of growth to be accommodated through intensification versus greenfield development. So again, it has to be very much a made in Moncton sort of approach, something that works for the community. And in some ways, it puts the city in much more of the driver's seat, ultimately in the community as a large, to be able to determine your own future, which I think is helpful.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a really good point. Okay, thanks, Eric. Anybody else? Any thoughts you want to share? There you go, Mike.
It's Bill.
Bill, do you want to weigh in on that? And then I'll go to Michael. Yep, go ahead.
I think what's really interesting right now is we're seeing unprecedented growth taking place. And I think 3 years ago, we had an all-time record for all-time development. And last year, we had an all-time record again with most construction value. And in fact, it looks like we're heading for another all-time record. And so we, when we look at the city and we get a better understanding of our growth forecast, and it's interesting listening to people like Michael Sharp that moved here from Victoria. And I think everyone in Moncton is meeting newcomers from different parts of the country. And so we're seeing a lot of newcomers. And so where are we going to grow? And what's interesting is in areas we're trying to grow, we don't have the right infrastructure to support it. We got growth pressures. And so we're going to have to make some decisions about where do we want to prioritize. And even when you look at all those different growth areas around the city, they're all going to require certain types of infrastructure. And part of what Eric and his team are going to be doing is looking at, okay, here's how we can grow. Here's what percent we might want to attract to certain parts of the city. But in order to do this and accommodate it, we're probably okay over the next few years. But if we think further down the road, we are going to need certain infrastructure. What are they? How do we plan for them? And how are we paying for them? And we're going to be using things like development charges, working with developers to come up with secondary plans to open up certain areas. But so those are all some of the things I think we got to think about. And I know I'm probably getting too far out there, and that's part of the fiscal impact scenarios. But we have a lot of high potential areas, and how should we prioritize them? So it's going to be interesting to see how this is all sorts out through this process. Thanks.
Bill. Thanks, Bill. Michael, you've got your mic on.
Yes, following very much in what Bill is saying, is saying also, I think, getting at what Eric Jingles was saying earlier too. It's the first, you have to look at the long term. Yeah. I think the question you've got down here, thinking about the city of Moncton in the context of New Brunswick, what's the role of the city of Moncton? It's in the context of New Brunswick as a whole, I think is the big question to address, because Moncton has a leadership role in particular things in economic development and certain areas of economic development, which is why it's growing. In other words, what's the reason it's growing? Why is it growing? And that is going to drive your long-term thinking, because Moncton has to adjust in concert with what's going on next door in Dieppe to why there's this growth, so that it can, as Bill was saying, make better strategic decisions for focusing certain types of development in different areas for their particular reasons. Most likely, it's all got to be tied to the economic purposes for why people are moving here. Is typically it. It's not tourism. This is not a tourism city. The tourism sector is never going to be a moneymaker here. It's going to be too tiny. It's a logistics center, and whatever main elements grow here that serve the province and the region of the Maritimes. So it's growing from that, knowing why it's growing and what its role is. It's going to be telling you now who are the people who are coming here and why they're coming here. And that's going to start then dictating or informing, not the developers informing, where the developers will go where the least expensive land is, or the least costly land to build on is. That isn't what the city is trying to do. The city is trying to have development occur to have a sustainable population, sustainable growth, sustainable infrastructure, and in concert with the real policy changes that are happening, being driven by climate change, new economies, because the economic model of the world is changing right before our eyes. So, and Moncton is experiencing those forces. And so I think that thinking about the city in the larger context of New Brunswick and its role is that long-term question is going to, because you can easily come up with 5-year, 10-year goals. Oh yeah, we'll focus on area 4 or area 3. But why?
Yeah.
It,
Okay.
it's got to be tied to
Okay.
the why.
Yeah. Okay. Why
And
people
longer
are
term,
moving there.
it's well, it's just getting back to the Mississauga model, but many other cities have been doing or trying to do the same thing too, and going for a longer term vision.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Michael. Anybody else? Just scanning my list. I'm not seeing any. I'm going to move into the next steps. So we are following the 2 sessions. We have another session exactly like this, same presentation tonight at 7 o'clock. We will be following these 2 sessions with an online survey, sharing similar content and putting it out on another platform to see if we can reach as many people as we can, and for them to give us a sense of whether they're agreeing or disagreeing with some early thinking on some directions. We are going to post some of Watson's work in the middle of the month, and all of this will live on the project webpage. We'll post a summary of everything that we've heard in this early stage of the exercise, probably early December, because we want to include the results of some interviews we've had, some meetings with some stakeholder groups, the input that we get in these 2 workshops, and then the results of the online survey. We're going to be posting the growth scenarios that Eric has been speaking to early in the new year, and then we're going to hold another round of public engagement, I'm thinking early in the new year. And then again, we'll follow that with another online survey. So the team is trying to use as many different tools and tactics as we can to reach out to the broader Moncton community to get input on the growth strategy as we go along. Is there anything else that anybody wants to share before I wrap up the meeting on everyone's behalf? Yep, go ahead, Boyd.
Comment about the fact, previous speakers, I can't remember your name, I'm sorry, said Moncton's not a tourism town.
Yeah, yep, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I'd have to disagree. The city has spent a lot of money on infrastructure to make it a tourist town, including a $117 million hockey rink downtown, the Magnetic Hill process and so forth. It's more of a regional tourist center. You have to throw Shediac into the equation. The number of hotels here in Moncton is probably disproportionate to what it normally would have. It used to be, until COVID, quite a large convention center. It was people, you wouldn't believe the number of cars you see here for Nova Scotia, in particular PEI, at our shopping malls. And of course, most of them all stay at a hotel for the weekend. It's sort of a regional tourism center, if you like. I grant you, perhaps our number of tourists from Europe and even from the United States is not as great, but it is definitely a tourist town. And during the winter, normally when no COVID's not around, we have try to get a hotel room. It's full of hockey parents. We have more hockey rinks per capita than any city in New Brunswick, fourplex as well as other places. And then there's Riverview Dip; they have rinks too. So it's a try to get a hotel. It's full of hockey people. And so I can't.
Okay, just wanted to provide some clarity on that. Okay, fair enough. Thanks, Boyd. Yep, Eric, go ahead.
And going back to your other question about concerns for the future, I think for me a big concern is the amount of green space that's being used up. Now I know that Caitlin and John from Thrive Properties were talking about developers and what they put back in. I'm not exactly sure what the details are. I know that certainly with Vision Lands that was hard to develop because to access it, and I believe, maybe Bill can clarify this for me, that the city put in a bridge which allowed the developers to be able to develop that area. And now anyone who's on that road or accesses that property, whatever, they have to have whatever percentage of a frontage they have on that road, they have to pay towards infrastructure, so everyone's kind of sharing the costs. But regardless, if whether a developer pays the city extra money for as part of the arrangement, I would like to look at it to see, is that enough? Because if
Okay.
you say, I'm going to cut down these trees and I'm going to pay you instead, maybe that's not the right thing to do, because once those trees are down, they're down and you're not going to get them back.
Okay.
And when there's so many things in terms of green space, in terms of mental health, physical health, creating walkable areas and walkable communities and that sort of stuff, reducing surface temperature by having more green, and looking at a study recently saying that there's the cost to cool a building was like 30 to 35% more if the sun was bouncing off a parking lot and hitting a building. Well, all these things have an effect. And I think that as humans, we're mostly water, and like water, we take the path of least resistance. I think that if we are going to be smart in the development for the future, we need to perhaps take a little bit of a harder path, but it'll get us to a better place.
Okay, Bill, you've got your mic on. Did you want to respond?
Yeah, just right now, when you look at the vision lands, and I think there might be information on the city's Let's Chat Moncton website, but there's under the municipal plan, there's a secondary municipal plan, sort of a neighborhood plan for this area. It is starting to develop off the west side off Mapleton. You're starting to see various development. Similarly, on the east side of Halls Creek, that whole neighborhood. But we're in the process of trying to work with a number of landowners to review and update the overall secondary plan. But there are policies focused on making great neighborhoods, but also to protect the natural areas, environmental policies. But one of the key issues from the Mapleton side is getting a boulevard, the Louis J. Robichaud Boulevard established, and that requires a bridge. And so one of the things we're looking at, that's the investing in infrastructure, front-ending infrastructure, and doing cost recovery with development. And that's going to be sort of assessed in the near future. But that's sort of key to, if this is an area we want to open up, you're looking at transportation objectives and infrastructure, and how do you build that into the city's development plans, and so there's going to be more on that in the future. So
Okay, thanks,
Okay.
Bill. Anybody else? Just a final call out. I'm not seeing anything. This has been a really terrific conversation. I really do appreciate the time that people carve out a couple of hours this afternoon to have this conversation. Really insightful for us. I've got a ton of notes that we will be going through and synthesizing them. So keep an eye out for that summary of what we've heard these first few months of the exercise that will be posted on the project webpage. And I'm going to end the meeting on everyone's behalf by saying again, thank you. Keep an eye on the webpage. Everything that we're producing will find a spot on that page. Andrew, I see you put your mic on. Do you want to say something in closing?
I was just getting ready to say goodbye on behalf of the group as well, but if you haven't already displayed that link, it's letschatmoncton.ca. So there's a tile there for the urban growth strategy, and that will be, as Donna mentioned, the project hub.
Okay, thanks so much, everyone. And
Thanks,
we
everyone.
will talk again.
Thank you.